Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov chess channel and welcome to a new chess strategy and tactics video. So in this video we'll talk about the endgame stage again. Today we'll talk about very important concepts of the endgame stage like maximum activity, restriction of your opponent's activity and the power over the simple threat in an endgame. These concepts I think are very important and have to be recognized in your endgames, because if you don't follow them, if you make maybe a tiny little inaccurate move, you could maybe draw or winning endgame, or you can maybe lose a drawish endgame. So in my opinion, very strange it is to play sometimes the endgame, because sometimes it seems so that you're winning, but still your opponent is struggling, your opponent is battling, and then you have to be really accurate in order to win such games. So I prepared really beautiful endgame that shows really these concepts in a beautiful way. We have here Judith Polgar versus Veselin Topalov back from 2005. I skipped now the opening stage, but when we watch now this particular position, we have now some issues here. The first problem when we play now the game with the black pieces is that we have now the weakness on e6. We have also the pawn weakness on g7, so our pawns are not connected, which are of course an object of our opponent's attack. And we have here an extra pawn on the queen side. We have here a 4 versus 3 pawn majority on the queen side. But when we think about it harder, it's very tough here to create maybe a passer somehow on the queen side. Even if you play something like c6 and then b5, white will simply not react, white will wait, and even if you trade some pawns, again, nothing dramatic will change here on the queen side. So we can not really say that it's now a fully winning endgame because of the extra pawn. So from this point on, we are analyzing now this position together, and I would really love for you to participate also actively by solving many positional and tactical problems of this endgame. And we're starting now with this particular position, black to move. What would you do now in this particular position? Please notice that in these types of studies that we create here, there are no solutions which are ending the game immediately. It's not one of those puzzles, checkmate in 2, checkmate in 3. Now many times you simply have to find the best solution. So now from this point on, please maybe pause the video and try to see now the best continuation here for black. So what would you do? Okay, in the beginning we have talked about our weaknesses, but our opponent has also weaknesses. So first thing that we have to notice is our opponent's weaknesses. Weakness always in chess can be a weak square or weak pawn. I think a weak square is of course the square f4. Also the d4 square is weak. This pawn is weak on b3. It's a backward pawn. But also the pawn on f3 is a weakness. And here Veselin Topalov, after move f3, he played now the move rook to f8, simply playing against one single weakness. It's nothing spectacular. As I said, you not win such endgames immediately. You have to really struggle, you have to battle, you have to apply these principles. Now we have a simple threat which forces now here white to react. So now the knight is attacked. When we get attacked, our first thing that we should consider is there maybe a possible counterattack. A counterattack can be maybe the move rook to g4. I'm not saying it's a good move, but it has to be considered. Maybe there are some tactics. Now in this position, they are really not. You can play knight to f4, maybe support now the pawn, but white is winning here, I think, for sure. So, but at least we have considered this move. So that's the point. Sometimes a counterattack will work in your favor. So after move king to g2, now we can play at least this counterattack, which again forces our opponent to react. So after move king to g3, now my question is, what's your next continuation? So when we play endgames, we have to use the power of maximum activity. So what I mean about maximum activity is where would you place your pieces in which they have really the best activity, in which they cover maybe the most square, in which they are maybe creating the most threats. When we watch now this position, two pieces don't have, I think, a good activity or haven't really reached their maximum activity. There, of course, the king on b7, which has to be also included in chess endgames. You should not really consider the king something that you have to defend. In chess endgames, the king has to be active. But also the rook on g5 is not active. It can be maybe included on the h file. It may be useful in some other setup. So you see, the rook on f8, in my opinion, is perfectly fine because it's attacking at least the pawn on f3, and the knight on f4 is so far good, but it could be, of course, better. Maybe I think the knight could be also better if it gets to d4, but we'll come to that part in the later stage of the game. So now my question for you is, what would you do? Would you play here king to c6, activating the king, or would you play maybe the move rook to h5, activating the rook? What would you do? Okay, we have talked about our maximum activity, but we talk about here also about restriction in your opponent's activity. So here we have the immediate opportunity to be very active with a rook. We're threatening even some nasty checks here, and your opponent cannot actually compete here on the h file, because if you do so, then we have this one. We have here knight to e2, a check. You have to step back, we take, and now we are having our knight where we wanted to have him. Look at this, from this square there are new targets. The position is stretched, so you see we have two weaknesses. There is also a certain principle in chess that says when you have one weakness, when you have maybe one advantage in chess endgames, create another one, and then you will probably win the endgame for sure. This is, I think, the perfect example. There is now the weakness on f3, and there is now a weakness on b3. The game is over here for white for sure. So rook to h5, very nice move. King to f2 here was played by Judith Polgar, and now, as I said, again, we're searching for new activities. The king on c6 can be maybe improved, but only till the square c6. So far, the rook is, of course, cutting off the king's activity. So now we're searching for improvements of the knight. And as I said, where would we love to get our knight? Try to maybe search a path for the knight in order to get it here to d4. So pause the video and try to really search for a beautiful maneuver of the knight. So what's your next move here? Okay, in order to get the maximum activity of the knight, we have to reroute it. But this idea of the knight is not coming only to get the knight on d4. We have now, of course, this path for the knight, but we have also now opened the f file. We can attack now this f3 pawn by playing rook to h3, or maybe rook to f5, so at least we have provoked new activities in the position. So now comes a critical moment of the game. Rook to d7. As I said, when we get attacked, the first thing that we should consider is a possible counterattack. Sometimes it's working. In the previous example, it didn't work. We couldn't really sacrifice the rook for the knight, but maybe now it's working. No. So now pause the video and try to see now the best continuation here for black. Okay, here the counterattack is really working. Rook to h3, brilliant move. For instance, if white gets greedy and grabs this pawn on on g7, then we have this one. Rook to f3 is coming brutally into the game. Look at this. We're delivering another check with the knight. If you get here, in some lines, you can even get checkmated by the rook and knight activity. For instance, if you go here on b2, then you lose the pawn on b3, and now it's a different story. Now we can eventually create here pass pawn. We will probably grab also one of these pawns. So in my opinion, this game is over here for white for sure. So you see, rook to h3, very important counterattack. So as I said, we have considered the possibility of a counterattack. So now in the game, rook to e3 was played by Judith Polgar. Again, my question here: should we retreat? Should we defend this pawn? Do we have maybe opportunities to play a counterattack? Again, maybe for fun, pause the video and try to see now the best continuation here for black. Okay, again we have a beautiful activity here, knight to h4, beautiful counterattack, because if you play now rook to g7, then we have knight to f5 to fork. The game is over. We will eventually take out the exchange. This is still a weakness, so you can resign, I think, the game immediately. So that's why rook to d3 was played by Judith Polgar, and you see now with all of this counterattacks, with all of this principled play to gain the maximum activity, Veselin Topalov pushed here Judith Polgar into such a defensive position, in such a passive position, that basically this should be really game over. But of course, this is an endgame. This is never over. White is struggling here. White is battling, and again, you see we are applying now the principle of maximum activity, because now we have reshuffled a little bit the pieces all over the board. It's now a different story, but the story is not changing. Again, we ask ourselves the question, where is the next best activity of our pieces? And you see, again, three moves come to my mind. The rook to h1 is of course getting a huge activity, because we can get the rook on b1 and attack maybe the pawn on b3. King to c6 is also an improvement. It gets the better activity of the king, and also the move that we have talked about, knight to f5. All of the three moves I think are perfectly fine. I think the next move is just part of your style, or maybe, I don't know, part of your calculations. What do you see? But really, all of these moves are really good. So nothing is wrong whatever you do, because you're applying simply the principle of maximum activity. So here we have king to c6 by Topalov, but in the next couple moves you see rook to c3, rook to h1, we have this one, knight to f5. So maybe you would have played it in a different move order, but that was the idea, to get the pieces even more active. And now the knight is coming on d4 and will hit still the pawn on f3. So now comes this idea. White of course wants to simplify the game by trading off the pieces, but when you are on the attacking side, never simplify the game for your opponent. Go for the maximum activity. Look at this, knight to d4, and again the position is stretched. That's what I mean. We have now created two weaknesses in the position, two obvious weaknesses, which are paralyzing White's pieces to the limits. Now White is simply out of game, and now the knight is on d4, which creates of course our path for the king. The king can be now activated also in a better way. So really amazing play here by Veselin Topalov. Knight to f1, cutting off the first rank. Rook to h5, again the power of simple threat, attacking simply the weakness. You cannot even protect it with f4. Rook to f4 or rook to e5 is going to happen. So you cannot do anything here. You have to play now just some moves. Look at this, Judith Polgar doesn't know what to do. Rook to e3, rook to d3, knight moves. So basically White is just repeating moves in a continuation. Rook to f4, again the maximum activity. The rook is now cutting off the fourth rank. We have rook to d3, again repetition. g5, this is now a very important move, because when you have gained maybe a powerful activity, or maybe even the maximum activity, then probably the next move is a pawn move. And now g4 is a huge threat. We will simply continue the pressure. So it's really messed up game. So we have now king to e4, rook to e4, pardon me, and now comes really sort of a humiliating move here by Veselin Topalov. This move I would not recommend you. It's also not maybe the recommended move by top engines, but he played an interesting move that shows how good his position is. He played now a stunning king to b7, although probably king to d7 is meeting more our idea of the maximum activity of principled play. But this move, king to b7, is just a pure humiliation, because here White doesn't have any good moves. For instance, you play rook takes f4, then we have g takes f4, you lose this pawn, so it's not working. For instance, you play knight to d2 to somehow get the knight active, then we play again this one. Even if you trade again the pieces, again you're not protect your e5 pawn, so again a messed up game. For instance, you play something like rook to c3, that's really powerful, that you don't have to even touch anything, because your opponent's position is so bad. Now we can maybe attack this pawn again, maybe attack the rook, but now g4 is the breakthrough idea, and from this point on it's game over. We can maybe even push the pawn through. We can also maybe take out this one. It's simply a messed up game for White for sure. So look at this, king to b7, really amazing move. So king to g3, we have now rook takes e4, and after f takes e4, we have again this problem of the stretch defense. Again, two problems for White. Not only the pass around the g file, we have now again this problems of this backward pawn on b3. So now again a question for you, what would you do now in this particular position? So as we have talked about, maximum activity, restriction of our opponent's play, the power of simple threats, these are the basic concepts. So pause the video and try to see now again the next best move here for black. Okay, here rook to h4 restricts simply the king's ability to play. The rook is also stuck to the defense of the pawn on b3. The knight is also a little bit paralyzed, so really nice move. Now the king again can march towards the center of the board. So knight to d2. Now we have this idea, king to c8, maximum activity, getting the king more active. And now rook to e3. If knight to f3, for instance, this happens, then we have knight to f3, knight takes king takes f3, rook to h3 after a couple of trades. This is completely winning because we have this passer, and in one moment we'll get the king on f4, grab all of the pawns. White's king will always be deflected to the protection of the potential promotion here on the g file. So after king to c8, rook to e3 was played, not this move, knight to f3. We have now the move king to d7. We have rook to e1. We have king to e7, knight to f3. And after knight takes f3, king takes f3. Now my question is here, what would you do? Rook to h3 or king to f7? So now think about this position hard. This is now the toughest question, I think, of this study. A rook to h3 or king to f7. So you see how brutal this endgames can be. The ideal positions sometimes don't come to our mind. Sometimes we misjudge this position in 100%. So as I said, take your time, try to see now all of these tactical possibilities also for white. Okay, many of us would play this rook to h3, but never underestimate your opponent's also attacking opportunities, because if you allow your opponent to get the king again active, it's a different story. Maybe we can pick up now this pawn, but look at this. Now your opponent's rook is also coming into the game. Many of us would even continue like this. Rook to b4 has to be winning here. We are winning for sure. We will take out the pawn, but now look at this. This rook is coming into the game. The king, our king, is now suddenly getting passive, gets messed up here on the 8th rank, and gets cut off by the rook's activity. This king is coming into the game. We grab maybe one pawn, but now look at this. Now suddenly here white is taking over. Look at this. We maybe grab out this one. After king to e6, we play something like c4. We can even get checkmated. You play something like king to c8, then we can again deliver a check. You go here. Now we have this one, and we'll simply let this pawn roll. We can even promote. Again, white is winning. Believe me or not, white is winning in this particular endgame. So you see, many of us would go for this, go for a simple pawn, but the maximum activity is much more important. We have to play king to f7 because still we have occupied the h file. Still our king is active, and now after move rook to d1 that Judith Polgar played, now rook to f4. And this is now the way to go. If you get here, then we'll simply take out this one, and it's a different story. Still, we didn't lose our activity because white's king cannot get closer. So that's why here Judith Polgar had to play king to e3. But now with king to g7, really tricky stuff here by Veselin Topalov, because now he can cover himself, of course. And look at this. This pawn is rolling. The king is out of game, so you see the restriction of our opponent's king was much more important than maybe just to grab one pawn on b3. Really brilliant build, everything really correct here by Veselin Topalov. Rook to d1, we have king to g6, rook to d8, of course applying the Tarrasch rule, going behind the pawn, but of course here the Topalov simply pushed the pawn. We have now a couple of checks, but the king is getting more and more active, and now Judith Polgar goes for the pawn, but nothing spectacular. Now rook to f3 is working. Now king to g3 again. You see Topalov is never really taking this pawn on b3. He activates just his pieces further. We have this idea, but now again king to f4. We have rook to e8, rook to e3. Now a check. Look at this. We can take out this pawn. Here Judith Polgar tried to push the pawn further, but now after king to d3, e7, and king to c3, in this position, Judith Polgar resigned. So what's the problem? Of course, black cannot be challenged by the king, so the king cannot attack the rook. The rook is perfectly fine protecting the pawn here, so nothing can happen here. But now if in one moment, white steps back from the defense of the pawn. We will eventually get the pawn, and now we can play something like king to d2, and then eventually we play rook to e3, grab now finally this pawn, and you see white king is simply far away from the action. So as I said, after move king to c3 in this position, Judith Polgar resign. If you don't play, of course, this idea rook to g8, then we'll simply pick every of this pawn. So again, it would be game over here for white. So incredible endgame, basic concepts, maximum activity, restrictions of your opponent's activity, and the power of simple threats. Really, really basic concepts, I think, applied here by the top grandmaster Veselin Topalov. So, okay, I hope that you enjoyed this endgame study. Really, really interesting ideas for sure. I'm sure this can be useful. Not all of us can play, of course, the endgame like this, but sometimes, even though you cannot maybe calculate everything, just remember sometimes the basic concepts and you get the move then afterwards, because you see many things can go wrong although you're seemingly winning, but still this is so complicated. The endgame stage has its own rules, believe me. I lost many games that I should have won, draw some many games that I should have won, so won also some games that I should not have won, so it's not the point about that. But as I said, the endgame stage is really the toughest stage of the chess game. So okay, as I said, I hope that you enjoyed the study. If you want to see more chess endgames like this and maybe some other studies about openings and also of middle game strategies, please check out our series so far. Here are the important links here on my YouTube chess channel, and if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. What to say, chess is the best, of course.